Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I am your host for today, Ben Thomas. When you think about security, you think about AI, you think about biometrics and behavior detection. A lot of times there may be some red flags that go up. And a lot of times those red flags go up because there's a lot of miseducation out there. There's people who are saying things maybe that are partial truths or half truths. And I want to spend some time today digging in a little bit deeper into some of those misconceptions, maybe dispelling some of those rumors, and really working to educate our communities. And my guest today is Shawn Fontenot from Oosto. Shawn, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, great to be here today. Thank you, Ben.
Well, Shawn, look, you get to have conversations with folks every single day about these topics, right? And that's kind of a unique position that you get to be in as somebody who lives more on the marketing side of the world, right? You get to talk about different verticals, talk about different use cases, applications, reach a lot of those folks on social media who may be asking a lot of those questions. And it's an interesting topic, right? Because I think that when we talk about AI and we talk about surveillance, we talk about biometrics, it's very ambiguous, right? And certain people are worried about data being used nefariously and all sorts of different things about use cases and enterprise applications. And I want to ask some of those questions, right? Because I have some of those questions too. But I want to start with the question about privacy, right? I think that the immediate red flag that typically goes off in folks' minds is, oh, I don't want people capturing my data and using it and being able to create deep fakes and all these sorts of different things, because it's confusing, right? It's hard to know and it's hard to understand, but especially in enterprise applications, I think that there's a lot of really great conversations from not only the manufacturer and service provider standpoint, but even those enterprise applications. So I want to ask that first question is, what about privacy, right? What are some of the strongholds, or what are some of the things being done to prevent maybe some of those nefarious actions when it comes to privacy and biometrics?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think it's interesting, because a lot of people see things on TV. They hear things in the media. Maybe they even read about some of our competitors, and they have a lot of misconceptions about, in general, how the technology works, but also specifically, right? Those are questions we answer with our customers every day, or prospects. And so one of the things we start with is having that privacy mindset. So we talk about, and we take a lot of pride in the idea of vision AI for good. So it's a really great place to start. How are you using the technology, and what problem are you trying to solve? So we are trying to solve really mission critical problems that customers are having around security. So that starts with identifying, hey, what problems do you have? And really, who are you looking for? We're not looking for everyone. And in fact, when we start with a customer, we start with an empty database. We have no data. Oosto maintains no information on anyone. We maintain no data. We collect no data. We start with an empty database, and then we go to our customers and say, what problems are you trying to solve? Well, we have a watch list of people who have threatened our company. We have someone who had a restraining order who has been threatening the nurses here. We have someone who is looking to do harm and blow up the place, who has threatened the place. So we all know that there are bad actors out there. There are people looking to do harm to other people, places, and even, people looking to, if you're a food manufacturer, looking to potentially sabotage your products that could cause harm across, an entire food chain. And so we start with, most often who those folks are, and that's what we're trying to do, is help our customers identify who those people are before they even can come on the premises, before they can do harm. And we do that in real time. But even then, when we think about privacy, so we're not capturing everybody's data. We're really looking distinctly at a moment in time. Someone has walked onto the property. We have them on a list because we know that they have intended to do something bad, and we're going to send an alert in real time. We also make sure that beyond our technology, that we are working with our customers to say, once you get that alert, what are you going to do with that alert? We work with casinos. Those casinos have an extraordinarily high threshold for accuracy. They are regulated by the gaming board. The gaming board tells you what you can and cannot do. And so when they get that alert, and this is what we tell all of our customers, make sure that you have a process in place, multiple processes in place, to make sure that that is the right person, that you have your eyes on that someone takes a look at it, someone else takes a look at it and says, yeah, that's who we think it is. So it's really very far, right, from what you're seeing on TV, where the alert comes up and you're like, and then you send out a squad of people to go and, to capture them and take them down. It's not really what happens at all. Another thing I want to point out is we don't search, Oosto only searches basically in real time for that person. So we're not going around looking at open source data. We're not looking at data that's on the websites or on Facebook pages. We really have no idea. And by the way, when we capture that face, we're only capturing a mathematical model of that face. So we don't even know who the person is. We have no personally identifiable information. So I think those are a lot of misconceptions people have. And I'm glad you started with that question.
Well, it makes me laugh. You talk about things that you see on TV. I always tell folks all the time, you watch CSI and, the investigators keep saying enhance, and then they zoom in all the way to the credit card number and can pull it in. Some of that is pretty theatrical, right? And it's not really always typically how things work. You talked about casinos, ironically enough. Casinos function a lot differently from a security standpoint than people think they might, right? And we got the chance to, even back at a show about a year or so ago, talk to some of those people in the casino. And I think that what's most interesting about when we talk about privacy is that it actually is kind of what I would call first party data, right? It's similar to the conversation that people have around AI. AI is trained in the way that you want it to be trained, right? These models and the data and the tools and the software that you guys deploy is trained in the same way, right? So because it's that own data, that first party data, there is that natural level of insulation, right? And it's something that not necessarily becomes owned by the enterprise, right? But it's something to where it kind of lives in that own ecosystem. It's not something that, you mentioned you're sharing with Meta or Facebook or whatever. And I think that helps kind of dispel some people's worries. But, one of the interesting things, I talked about one of the shows that we were at was ISC West. That show is very unique because you see a lot of technologies like this out there, and you hear people that sort of kind of do the same thing and folks that don't. I want to point out that it actually spotlights the importance of the provider in these situations, right? There's a level of accountability that a business or an enterprise has when they make decisions and purchasing decisions on service providers. Because you talked about how, okay, we're building on first party data, we're doing things. There are providers out there who don't do those things, don't have that level of insulation, or don't have that level of cybersecurity. And I think that actually kind of leads into my next question is, what level of accountability does that enterprise buyer have to actually vet and make sure that their vendors, specifically in this case, kind of the AI and security side of things, are compliant with the standards that they as an organization want to have?
I think that's such a great question. And I don't think we're discussing this enough, right? So I do think that when we talk to our customers, they all are aware of security. They all are, IT teams are vetting the different providers that come in. But I think in this industry, there's so many misconceptions because people think, facial recognition or behavior analytics. And one, they think they're all the same. And so maybe they don't even know the questions to ask, right? And so I think that's part of the challenge is we as an industry need to do a better job of helping to educate our customers and helping to educate the market. So, there are some providers out there who have really commoditized, facial recognition technology, who maybe have even given, the industry a really bad name in some instances. So, that's one category. You've got, folks who are using or who are developing technology that goes out and sources information, from the internet and from other places. You have some that maybe have less robust training on the algorithms. So they just don't have the history maybe that an Oosto has. You have some that focus on forensics. And as well, there's that whole group of I've got my phone here. I thought it was right there. Got my phone here. I pick it up and I can, open my phone with my face. I go to the airport. One of the things to think about is what are your use cases, right? So most of the time, the people you are looking for, I would venture to say 100% of the time, those people are not standing there looking at a camera waiting to be caught. So you really need to understand that, hey, is the provider I'm using, is the people that I'm looking at, are they specialized? Do they understand how to operate exceptionally well in really poor conditions, in crowded conditions, in bad lighting, so that you're really capturing people in the wild? The people we are looking for and you're looking for are not stopping, to have their photo taken. The other thing I think taking a look at is what processes do you need to deploy, right? To make sure that you're using technology responsibly. You need to ask questions about bias. You also need to ask questions about, are the people that you're looking at and evaluating, are they reinvesting in that technology? Is it a one and done and they're on to the next algorithm? Are they really looking to enhance it every day? Things that we're doing is we've added body recognition. So the ability to kind of create a composite of a person. So you're not relying just on the face. You're creating a complete mathematical model that makes it even more accurate when you're looking for someone, right? You can really understand more about who you're looking for and really be able to find them much more accurately. So I think those are a lot of the questions. Also, what is built into the technology? So am I able, if I'm training my users and, I'm training them on how to upload images. We don't want them uploading poor quality images, right? Sometimes that's all you have. But, do you have systems in place? Does the technology have systems in place to say, if you upload that picture, you're going to get a bad result. Garbage in, garbage out. We want to make sure that you're aware that that's a poor quality picture, and we want to make sure that the results are going to be bad. So it's really a whole process of kind of looking at those things, looking at scalability. How do we, operate across multiple locations? How do we add more GPUs? How do we add more cameras? How easily is it to say, today I'm guarding, this part of my campus, and tomorrow I have a graduation and I need to take these licenses and move them and be able to operate over there. So I think those are a lot of the questions that, IT departments need to have, and they need to insist on some type of, we can look at some of the reporting and measurements and benchmarks that the industry does, but there's nothing like really understanding what happens in your own environment. You cannot afford to have false positives. And with the right processes and the right technology in the real world, you can come pretty close to 100%. And we've seen that with our customers who work tightly with us.
I love that you kind of bring up that individual accountability of a business or someone who's deploying this technology. And it brings up a really interesting question, right? We talk about, we're here in Texas right now. We've got some of the best Fortune 500 companies headquartered here in the world, but they also have offices in India, in Dubai, in the UK, and they have to be able to have a conversation about globalization, right? Because if anybody's paid any attention to the security industry for a while, how fragmented the compliance laws are globally, right? You've got GDPR compliance, you've got CCPA, you've got all these different things. And as an enterprise, you have to be able to have those conversations. That's oftentimes one of the things that people don't understand. How, from an Oosto perspective, how are you guys building the technology to make sure that that's compliant across globalized regions and even offices across all sorts of different regions globally?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So, there are some markets where, where we are not focused for a reason, right? That there are just limitations on how the technology can be used. But for most of our customers, we're dealing with people in Latin America, food manufacturer, retailers who have multiple locations, right? So we need to, training is such a critical part of it, working with them to understand the regulations in their market, how they can use the technology, and also helping them to really create that process internally, to create those checks internally. One thing we do is we make sure that we check in with our customers. We do reviews and audits to make sure that as things change, we're raising the flag saying, hey, you know what? We just heard about this. This is what we believe that means, right? This is what our teams are telling us about what this new law or regulation means. We want to make sure you're aware of it. You're being compliant. We are always emphasizing that whole theme of Vision AI for good. You can't do good if you're not operating in a really good and compliant manner. From a technology standpoint, we have capabilities like HQ or our headquarter functionality that kind of gives us more visibility and gives them customers more control over, what they're doing across multiple locations. So that's really important. And it really is kind of a partnership, right? Working directly with our customers and touching base often. Things change really frequently on a daily basis. I'm looking at new legislation. I'm talking with customers, trying to understand how, does that impact you? Does it not impact you? And just making sure it needs to just stay top of mind.
Yeah.
right? It's not a set it and forget it. These are conversations we need to continue to have.
Well, I think that kind of leads me into another misconception that people have is the idea of scale of this type of security or this type of platform, right? Which is, oh, I'm going to build this system and in 7 years it's going to become obsolete. Maybe 3. I don't know. It depends on technology is evolving pretty rapidly these days. But, oh, as I add more offices, as I add more employees, oh, it's not going to be able to keep up with, now I've got 10,000 employees instead of 5, right? I think that a lot of times we convince ourselves that the level of scale isn't there. And that just isn't true, is it?
No, it's not true at all. And one of the exciting things I think about our technology is scale is top of mind. When you're working with really large enterprises, Fortune 50, Fortune 100, massive manufacturers, the expectation is we want to grow with you. Our technology should be an enabling technology to help you grow. Because if you don't have these security concerns, if you're, I'll go back to the, one that we keep talking about that's just really kind of interesting is, we're talking to farmers, these vertical farming, right? And they're saying, hey, we want to continue to grow. Well, they can't grow if people are sabotaging their crops. Right. So we are built for scale because we understand that the customers that we're working with will scale. These are successful companies who are only going to get bigger. So how do we do it? It's a combination. We've got technologies for the cloud. We understand, the ability to really scale rapidly through, edged cloud deployment. We're deploying more at the edge. So we're kind of moving that security out into parking lots, perimeter. We've got technology that's working on, we've got mobile as well, applications to be able to accommodate that. So thinking about also just from looking at, really massive organizations and thinking about globally, how do we address that at all levels? How do we add extra GPUs rapidly? Let's talk about edge technology and just how incredible it is. And the ability, we have optimized our algorithms to operate at the edge. So it's not just about deploying at the edge, but can I achieve the same results at the edge? Can I achieve the same performance and accuracy? So we continue to invest in that. And that's an area, we've been kind of a pioneer in that area. We take a lot of pride in it. And we think it positions us to serve our customers as they grow, and expand.
I was kind of chuckling to myself. Obviously, we get to have conversations like this all the time and talk about some of the technicalities and technical terms and talk about edge computing versus cloud computing. I was laughing. You and I had a chance to talk a little bit before the show. And a lot of times the decision makers and the stakeholders for security are people who have absolutely no idea what words we just said right there. We're talking about HR. We're talking about, operations for a building. Obviously, there's that CSO security-minded person who's responsible for a lot of different things. But I think another misconception that we talk about is that the CSO isn't the only person accountable, right? HR is that one that really jumps out for me, right? Especially you talk about workplace safety security. There is a layer of HR accountability where they are accountable for the safety of employees while they are on site. And it's an HR problem if something goes wrong, right? It's obviously you yell at your security guard at the end of the day, I'm sure. But that if somebody was to get sued, it's not the security guard in the parking lot, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So, a lot of the conversations, like you said, are technical conversations. We're having these, we're talking, GPUs and all this. But, sit in the office with an HR director at a hospital and understand what they are responsible for. We know they're responsible for hiring. We know all of those things. We're responsible for training, but they are also responsible for making sure that the employees that work there are safe. It's not just a security imperative. If I come in and I'm a nurse and, there's someone who I have a restraining order against, when I am at work, there's an expectation that the company, that hospital, HR is keeping me safe so that I can do my job. So we're having more of these conversations with HR. We're having more conversations about how we can remove some of those vulnerabilities, right? HR is also responsible to a large part of also just managing some of that experience within a hospital, understanding, for example, that, we want our staff to protecting your staff from even, accusations of, hey, that person let so-and-so in, or that person let my, this happened to my infant. So having those conversations, bring them in. Also, we're finding that they have budget. They just don't know what to do with it. They don't, they turn to security. And by the way, imagine being in the, I think to humanize it, and I appreciate you asking that question. If I'm a security guard and I'm guarding a hospital, I think it's just, I keep going back to it. I know you have a new baby. What an incredible responsibility to protect all these people. But what a heavy load. What a heavy load that we put on them to take a look and say, I have pictures of people that I'm looking for. I'm sitting in a control room and I'm looking for those pictures of people. Or I'm sitting in here and that person coming in, I don't know if that's the guy who has a restraining order. He grew a beard this time. He gained some weight. He put a tattoo on his face. We need to support them. This technology doesn't take their jobs away. It is supporting them so that they can do their jobs. It's removing some of those vulnerabilities. And I think we need to think about that human element more. So I appreciate you kind of bringing that up.
Well, I love too that you've brought up a few different examples, right? Healthcare being one, you talk about farmers being another. I think there's this sort of stoic idea in our industry that, if it's not in a hardened facility, they don't care about security, right? But it's interesting. You get to even go into retail and loss prevention, all these different things. What are some of those verticals, maybe the non-traditional ones, where you see folks say, hey, you know what? I wasn't expecting the farmer to need to protect his crops at night because someone was stealing it, right? Or protecting their livestock. What are some of those use cases, maybe verticals that are kind of emerging, maybe outside of traditional just facility protection?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And now, what we're seeing, because we have technology now to handle, or to detect behavior. So no, this is not I can't tell you whether Ben is happy or not, although I can tell you're smiling now. So I kind of think you are, but our technology can't do that. But what we can do, and so new use cases are cropping up where we can say, you know what? I see someone in a parking lot, anywhere in any parking lot, who's been crouching for a while. So I see a behavior, crouching, and a period of time. And I don't know what that tells me. Does that tell me that person had a heart attack? Maybe. Does it tell me that they lost their keys and they still can't find them, or they're trying to fix a tire and they're struggling with it? Or does it tell me that person is crouching because they're looking to attack someone when they come up? So they're the kind of unique use cases, I think, around, those other verticals, where we're, another thing we're doing is working with assisted living, really thinking about newer use cases that I love the idea of freeing people up to do what they're meant to do, right? So in assisted living, right? If you have a person who maybe has some, challenges with memory care, and, they're approaching the door and, they have a chance of eloping, right? Of leaving and coming to harm. We want to be able to alert you to that so that you can go and make sure that person is safe. But we also want to make sure that we're doing those things so that those nurses, those caregivers, those people there have that freedom to know, I know that door is being watched. I know that alert is going to go off if that person. So now I'm really focused on what I need to focus on. I don't always have to be paranoid and always have to, split my attention all the time. So those are really interesting use cases, I think, as well. We're doing a lot more on fence lines. So think of all the businesses that are, rural, maybe have, oil and gas has massive fence lines. What are we doing there? How do we protect that? How do we deploy the technology on a mobile device potentially to detect someone who wants to, put a bomb over a fence or something, or, so we're not just, our focus is so much on protecting people, but when we think about it, we're protecting against sabotage, we're protecting against vandalism, we're protecting against, the destruction of your potential, revenue, the source of your revenue. So it's really kind of interesting.
Yeah. I love that you talk about making it personal, right? I think I am of the mindset that security is as much my responsibility as it is my employer's, as it is anybody else's, right? And I think the conversation we're having today really stems from a lot of people learning and understanding kind of that world of security and the level of responsibility that they have, right? Hey, I know that when I go into work, I'm being taken care of, and that someone has taken that personal responsibility for me. But, to make it even hyper practical, right? Think about schools, right? You mentioned my daughter. Now we have to talk about schools. And, you look around the world, there's a lot of conversations about things happening at schools. And if I was to be able to say, hey, you know what, this school, if it comes down to picking a school that has technology like this, that's proactive, that's preventative, and one that doesn't, I know what I'm choosing, right? And it becomes so much more of an interesting play from a use case where you would deploy this, right? It's great. Obviously, you want to have that safety and security, but it's also peace of mind for your people, right? It's not this idea of we're some corporate overlord making all this information. It's, hey, Stacy, hey, I just wanted to let you know we apprehended him, but the guy you had a restraining order against is now in jail. He tried to enter the building. That's a much better conversation than him busting down the door and something happening, right? That makes it very personal for people.
I love that you're talking about that. So 2 points. One that's really interesting is I talked to someone who does security audits. And I think, if you're talking about peace of mind, well, after I had that conversation with him, I had a little bit less peace of mind. But he talked about how easy it is for people to enter a space that they're not supposed to be in. And we are very trusting as human beings, right? So, someone shows up at my daughter's school, it's got the janitor's uniform on, and it's like, oh yeah, let him in. Or, hey, I'm just here to fix your AC, and we're very trusting. And I'm constantly surprised by sort of how the things that we don't see, right? Because we just don't think about it. And there was this story about this guy who had Garfield stickers. He was an auditor, and he just would walk around while his colleague was talking to the people at the entrance, and he was able to get in to all these different spaces and put Garfield stickers all over the place. And then when at the end of the conversation, they said, we think we're pretty safe. We think we're pretty locked down. And they're like, let's take a walk. And it was just, riddled with Garfield stickers. So I think that's part of it, like that peace of mind is knowing that I'm not going to find a Garfield sticker today, right? And then I think the other part of it, when I think about schools, is let's think about the impact to a child of an active shooter drill. I don't want to have to go onto an active threat alert. Right. Let's just make sure that we have technology that can help to prevent them from having to do that, prevent that trauma. Because it's not just about, we talk so much about reactive and reacting to situations, but I think we need to talk more about proactive and prevention. And when we do that, I think it also comes with a lot of peace of mind. Yeah. If I know Oosto's technology is on a campus, I'm a little less worried about having an active shooter lockdown today. I have a little bit more peace of mind because I know that most of the time, and this is important statistics as well, like over 60% of the time or something, organizations know who their threats are, And so if you know, then I really feel like you have an obligation to protect the peace of mind. I think it is a moral imperative to say, what are we doing about that? It's not just about technology. It is about the people you're protecting.
You bring up some really incredible points, and obviously the idea of this conversation is to dispel some of those misconceptions that people have. I want to give you a chance to address maybe that person who is sort of that skeptic, right? There's a healthy level of skepticism that people should have for anything. But, say you've got that CSO saying, hey, well, I've heard all these things. Maybe it's a rural farm. Maybe it's somebody who maybe is a little bit less adept to newer technologies. How do you start that conversation, and what do you say to them?
I think you make it personal. I think we all, our mission is to protect people. And it's really simple because it's so fundamental. It's not just a mission, it's a promise. And at the end of the day, it is really hard for you to do your business if the people who are who are working for you, who are, in the corporate offices, who are in the banks, if they don't feel safe. And I think, helping them to understand, first of all, that imperative, and also to say, look, there is technology that can do that without invading privacy, that can maintain, you've got security staff that they're here for a reason. We're not telling you to get rid of them. We are going to make them so much better at what they do. I want to go back to the nurses in the hospital. What happens when you take that leap and you say, we're going to protect them, right? Well, there's a nursing shortage right now. It's really hard to find nurses. maybe it makes it easier for you to hire really good nurses. And then what happens in your community when you serve the community better, because you have a phenomenal nursing staff, and you start getting written up in the paper, and you have a reputation, and your ratings go up because you are so good at what you do. You have fewer accidents because they're focusing on what's important and they're less distracted. That's better for everybody. And I think, we can talk about privacy and we can show you how, and we are happy to do that and work with you and say, this is how it works and this is how it doesn't work. And then we can show you, right? We can sit down and show you. We can show you use cases. We can talk about how people's lives have been saved. And no one can really argue with that, right? No one can argue with experience. And the experience that we have is that the technology works and that it saves lives. And I think starting at a human point is the best place to start, right? Because I think people connect with that. And then you can start having that broader conversation. Let's talk about how. Let's get into that, right?
Yeah. Well, I love that answer, right? And you bring up some incredible points about, look, security is not only security, right? It's workplace culture, it's community service, it's, mental stability for people who may be struggling outside of the office, right? It's so many things, and you have to have that base level of understanding and that level of trust, right? And I think that you guys do such a good job of being willing to have that conversation, right? Which is why we're having this conversation today, because there are manufacturers, there are companies, service providers who are so worried about, so scared of answering these questions that it creates distrust, right? There's a natural lack of information, so they fill in the gap with what they think is correct, and it may not always be correct. So I'll tell you, I appreciate you having this conversation with us today, Shawn, and really Oosto at large, right? Thank you so much for the great work that you guys are doing, and I appreciate everything that you're not only doing in the community, but really for using Vision AI for good as well. It's an incredible initiative that you guys are doing, and we've already seen some incredible benefits from it.
Thank you so much. This has been great fun.
Awesome. Thank you all for tuning in as well. Be sure to like and subscribe and check us out next time.